Hey Reddit, what's the strangest coincidence you've ever personally experienced? Here in my little town in northwest England there's a good kebab shop from which the lads and I have ordered for years. We've been in there after countless nights out and had them delivered to our doors. So we know the guys who work there pretty well. They are mostly Turkish. Once a few of us got together for a short break in Turkey. Having got off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another pal who'd been on a different flight. As we stood, soaking in the ambience of a new country, none other than the tall guy from our local kebab shop walked across the road right in front of us. 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. Seeing Paul McCartney, the Beatles, on TV in 2001. And noticing he was tall. Next day I'm walking down a very quiet street. And walking towards me is a really tall guy. And it was Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression so he veered my way. Stuck his hand out and said hi mate. I was shocked. 18 years later I'm still shocked lol. Edit. I'm 6 feet 1. Turns out he's 5 feet 11. Maybe he was just lanky. He certainly appeared tall to me. I should also add that he didn't just stick his hand out. I meant to say he shook my hand. Crazy. He then briskly walked away. A very brief encounter but a really important one for me. I also wouldn't blame anyone for not believing me. It's a weird story. I used to get 2 buses home from work. I got off the first one having left my phone and keys on the front seat of the bus without realizing. Got on the second bus. Went to my favored front seat and my possessions that I didn't know were missing were waiting for me. The bus had changed driver and route. Still freaks my nut out to this day. Nobody believes me when I tell this story. But one day my husband and I ran into the same couple at 3 different places. In 2 different states. So my husband and I had an errand to run out of state. We leave early and stop to get breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The lady had on a funky shirt which is why she stuck out in my mind. After breakfast we drive the next state over to the office we have an appointment at. We're waiting in the lobby and the couple from the breakfast joint walks in. Weird. So we spend the day finishing up our errands and then we drive back home. I didn't feel like cooking so we stopped to get some dinner at the pub. We sit down at the table and guess who's already eating at the table behind us? The same friggin' couple. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there I just happened to think about this girl I knew back in college in Orlando. Just sorta wondered what she was up to and the like. Sure as shit I ran into her in a bar there the first night. She was there celebrating graduating from PA school. Me and a friend took some acid one night and were tripping hard. Decided to walk to a gas station and get some smokes or something. We walked by a car lot in the small town I'm from and all of the cars in the lot were cop cars. We were both walking ramrod straight all the way to the store. Very quietly bought whatever we went there for and took a back street back to his place. We just stared at each other for like an hour and didn't speak after we got there. Turns out the city had bought a whole new fleet of cop cars and they had all been delivered there and were on the lot for just that night. Was sitting in a restaurant about 200 miles from where I live telling my mother, who was visiting from a different country, about a trip I had to another country, about 6,000 miles away, with a work colleague. And the lady at the table next to us leans over and says, "I think you're talking about my son." Turns out I was sitting next to my colleague's parents while showing my mum pictures of our trip. In grade 10 English class. The teacher didn't have anything planned for us to do and it was close to the end of the year I guess. So she goes to the big cupo board in the corner and pulls out a stack of copies. It's examples of a successful essay written during a final exam. So we can learn what a good one looks like and how to build a narrative, etc. The topic of these was what was the most pivotal moment of your life? There's 3 examples. Ranging in proficiency. We read through the first 2. And I volunteer to read the last one aloud. I start reading. And I stop. The essay was about me. My big sister had gotten a really good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay which she wrote about the day I was born. I got pretty emotional about that one. Worked half day. Drove 6 hours from Southern California to Northern California for car camping with my wife. Chose obscure campground which was neatly deserted, off season. Picked the most deserted and remote campsite location. We planned on rocking the tent. Were bummed after setting camp and another couple selects site right next to us. Turns out to be a co-worker I'd spoken with earlier that day. Edit. I hadn't told co-worker anything about plans. We weren't close. Earlier that day we spoke briefly of work-related issue. My wife and I were in Tucson visiting my mother who just moved there. My wife decided she wanted tamale. We drove around for 2 hours stopping in restaurants looking for tamales. Couldn't find one. Went back to my mother's apartment. Literally 2 minutes later somebody knocked on the door of my mother's apartment asking us if anyone wanted to buy any tamales. One year I got a roommate through Craigslist. The guy was weird for sure, but good natured and paid rent. Anyway, after about 2 months of living with him my cousin comes over to hang. I introduce the two and my cousin in the most chill voice ever said, "Nah man. We know each other." Oh my god, they were roommates. Not me. But a pretty interesting story in my family. Two of my great grandfathers got imprisoned in the same jail. And served time together. My great grandfather on my mother's side was an architect and even drew my other great grandfather's house. My sister, Emily, was on a ski lift in New Mexico when some younger girl across from her asked if her name was Emily. Apparently the stranger, who kind of looked similar but underage, had found her lost ID the year prior and had been using it for a year to buy alcohol. Edit. After this blew up I texted my sister who reminds me it was weirder. She was later hiking with friends for 17 hours. They got tired. Thumbed for a hitchhike and got picked up by this girl's twin. I moved from my small hometown halfway across the country to a small city where I knew absolutely no one. At the first party I went to in the new town, I started chatting with a guy. Turns out he had also just left my small hometown. I met a Canadian guy while on holiday in South America and we ended up going sightseeing together. At the end of the day a person behind us tapped him on the shoulder and asked if the scar behind his ear was from cancer surgery. They got talking. Turns out they were from the same small town in Canada. Had the same type of brain cancer and had been operated on by the same surgeon. Was at the dentist getting a crown extension. Dentist. Hey. You were born on the 13th of July. So was I. Assistant. Me too. We all shared a look of surprise and longing with each other. Longing to be closer. Then they drilled the absolute FCK out of my teeth. Edit. Oh god. It's happening again. Had a kidney transplant last year. Nurse makes a comment about it having my name on it. He elaborated to say that the donor has the same surname as me. An officer from a different PD was showing me a picture of a guy they wanted to arrest in a different part of town. As I looked up from the computer, I see Dipshitty riding by on a bike. Literally 5 feet away from the squad car. I can imagine it's like a scene from a movie. Yep. We never could catch the bastard. Said bastard passes by slowly on bike. He sure was one elusive son of a bitch. Said son of a bitch waves at the cop. Cop waves back. Yeah, we've really just given up at this point. Who knows where he is? Could be halfway across the country by now. 2 years ago I was in Tokyo on holiday. I looked on Instagram and saw an old friend post a story showing he was also in Tokyo. We hadn't spoken in a few years. But I sent him a message letting him know we were in the same city. Not even 5 minutes later. We walked into a bar and he was standing there. This past November. I was in Toronto on business. After dinner, we went to a pub downtown. The first person I saw when I walked in was the same friend from Tokyo. We both live in Winnipeg. Told this story elsewhere but I'm making you all read it again. Was at a convention. There were only a few people in the room. My friend and I wanted an autograph from a voice actor. He started singing in his character voice. There were two random guys next to me. One pulled out a video camera to record it. Years later, my husband and I are talking with friends. And the convention comes up. The guy with the video camera was my husband. I also took a picture later that day of the crowds. And he is in that picture. I stood next to my husband years before I met him. Edit. Thank you to everyone who shared their stories. Amazing how our lives can intersect. And a big thank you to the Redditor who gifted silver. It's a major award. I have an uncommon last name and a not too common first name. I was in the hospital for a surgery and the person in the next room was there for the same surgery. Come to find out that we were second cousins and never knew that the other existed. He had the same name as me and his wife had the same name as my wife. The pastor of church where I was musician informed me that a wedding couple would be coming to see me after Sunday services to discuss music for their forthcoming ceremony. It turned out to be a girl I dated in high school that I hadn't seen or heard from since graduation and her fiancé registered signee. She remembered my organ playing from back then and already knew what pieces she wanted. I didn't even have to demonstrate. Organ playing. I've had several small world experiences, but the biggest was talking to a girl after my first university class and discovering through the course of a 2-hour-long conversation that our grandmothers had been each other's maid of honor and my aunt and her mom were best friends since childhood. How do you even know your grandmother's maid of honor? Back in the early mid-90s the phone system changed and you no longer needed to dial the area code for a long distance in-state call. We're a small state with only one area code. One morning I woke up to the phone ringing and when I picked up I recognized the voice on the other end as belonging to my old boss from a few years ago. She had an unmistakable voice. We had a nice conversation for a bit before she realized she had dialed the wrong number. I lived in a different town in a different part of the state. But the number must have been off by only one digit from the one she'd tried to call. To add to the coincidence, I had overslept and would have been late for work if she hadn't called me and woken me up. Both of my grandfathers were named William and both grandmothers were named Joyce. Started dating this girl a few weeks ago. We get to talking about where we live, etc. She lives in not only the same building but exact same apartment I lived in 2 years ago. It was so f***ing bizarre walking into my old apartment that I never thought I would see again. What are the odds? The person who sits next to me at work copies everything I do except she has no way of knowing. I wear a blue sweater. She wears a blue sweater. I bring leftover spaghetti. She brings leftover spaghetti. It is so weird I almost hate her. Are you sure you don't sit by a mirror? When I was 18, I lived in a town a very long ways away from where I ended up moving. I struck up a friendship with this guy from work in that town. We play Halo, watch movies, act, and he was awesome. I ended up moving suddenly due to a family emergency and never got his contact information. I didn't even remember his name a decade later. But I thought of him often as he was an awesome guy through all the years. 11 years later, I'm working at my job, carpooling with someone from my training class. And one night he asks if I mind his roommate being in the car as he was going to take the car after we got off at work and use it for the night. He introduces us. I turn around. And in the back seat is the guy from the town a very long ways away. We reconnected immediately. And now live together. He's my best friend. For sure. The godfather to my children. When I was 1 year old, we moved to a city some 500 kilometers away from where I was born. 15 years later my father decided to put me in a boarding school in the area of that first city, because he went there too. I got randomly put in a room with 2 other guys. Which one of them is still my best friend Toady. When I first visited that friend at his home, I discovered that he not only lives in the same city as we did, not much of a coincidence, as it's the only major city in that area, but in the same FCKIM house. OFC, I couldn't remember our old house. So I called my father to confirm that it's the same address, and it turns out that he very briefly knew my friend's family from selling the house. Edit. Last summer, I went to New York with my family for a week. A friend of mine that I hadn't seen since she graduated from college was living and working in New York at the time. So we decided to meet up for drinks. As we were walking through Times Square at 11 p.m. on a Saturday, who did we see on the other side of the street but another friend of ours from college? I knew he had been living in New Jersey, but he was in New York for a Grindr date. The three of us went to a bar and talked about life and how none of our friends live in Ireland anymore. They've all moved abroad. It was bittersweet and a crazy coincidence that three friends from a small university in Dublin would serendipitously meet in New York City. When I was a kid while hiking with my dad, I was babbling and said, "The teacher told us if you speak too much a fly will get in your mouth." In the exact moment a fly flew into my mouth. Had recently moved cities and had a new local phone number. Had to make a lot of calls to various utilities, etc. to get everything all set up. I call one of them. I'm speaking with the customer service rep. All is going fine until she asks for my phone number. When I tell her, she starts freaking out on me. "Who are you? How did you find me? How do you know the phone number?" Kind of stuff. Eventually managed to get her calmed down to the point where we could figure out what was going on. Turned out she had been in an abusive relationship where her ex had stalked and harassed her, including him and his friends, making threatening calls constantly. Eventually she had moved to a different part of the city and taken a new, unlisted phone number. My new phone number was her old one. And the moment I said it, she assumed he had tracked her down once again and the harassment campaign was about to begin anew. I'm not sure she truly believed me when I explained it all. But we eventually got through the phone call. When my best friend and I were around 16 years old, we both had a bunch of coins we were taking to Coinstar at Kroger. We had the exact same total in coins. To the penny. My best friend in high school had the same exact locker combination as me in a school of 1,200 people. Saw a combo written on a piece of paper of his and I asked why he wrote down my combo. He looked confused and said that's his combo. The combination locks are changed and reassigned each year. Edit. Everyone had the same locker combo. I dunno if this counts as a coincidence, because it might be influenced by the commonalities between us, but I was reading through one of my dad's old journals and found out that he and I share the same reoccurring nightmare. The details are basically identical, even down to the frequency of it happening, once a month. It's very trippy. Edit. Just to answer some facts, as far as I can remember I never discussed this with my dad. I felt okay perusing his journal because he's been dead for quite a while now, before his time, but having nothing in common with the details of the dream. It was suicide. I guess you can make of that what you will. I've detailed the dream itself below. When I was 18 I dated a girl who went to a private school. She told me they were having a dance, so I thought, okay, great. It'll be a nice night. She told me that only boys from a specific boys' private school were allowed to come because of an incident once when they let everyone in. Some girl got really drunk and puked on the headmaster's shoes, so they limited it to one boys' school after that. Fast forward 12 years and I'm with my fiancé, registered sign, different girl, at a wedding shower. I overhear my wife, "I was so embarrassed when I puked on the headmaster's shoes. I yelled, that was you. That's awesome. I love you even more now that you're famous. TLDR." In freshman physics, I became friends with the Japanese kid next to me. After a while he was helping me with my Japanese homework. Did really well after that. BTW. Close bracket. But after that class, we kinda drifted apart. Fast forward 2 years where I'm an exchange student in Japan over the summer and doing some sightseeing in Kyoto after the program. I'm crossing the street in Kyoto and I hear my name being called out. I look around and there he is. Thousands of miles apart we meet again. We got some drinks and good food together. It was a blast. No. His hometown was not Kyoto. He was also doing sightseeing while home for the summer. Edit. My first gold. Thank you, kind internet stranger.